My beloved child, listen closely, because what happened last night was not the romantic evening you might be imagining. Your soulmate really did sit across a dinner table from someone, and from the outside, everything looked like a date. Two chairs facing each other. Soft lights above them. Plates arriving one after another. A quiet conversation that seemed important enough for both of them to ignore almost everything happening around them. But there was one detail nobody in that restaurant could have understood. Your soulmate was not sitting there because their heart had suddenly moved away from you. In fact, the opposite was happening. The longer they remained at that table, the more their thoughts kept returning to you. And the person sitting across from them knew it. That is where this story becomes strange. Their dinner companion was not some exciting new romantic interest. This person already knew something about your soulmate's feelings, something your soulmate had been struggling to admit even to themselves. They had agreed to this dinner because a conversation needed to happen face to face, away from messages, interruptions, and assumptions. Yet when the first question was finally asked, your soulmate froze. It was a simple question: why are you still thinking about that person? No name needed to be spoken. Your soulmate immediately knew who they meant. You. Stay with this, because what happened after that question changed the entire atmosphere at the table. Your soulmate tried to smile it away. They looked down for a moment, moved something on the table, and gave an answer that sounded casual. But the person across from them was not convinced. They had noticed too much already. They had noticed how your soulmate became quieter whenever relationships were discussed. They had noticed how certain memories could completely change their expression. And most importantly, they had noticed that whenever your name somehow entered a conversation, your soulmate never reacted like someone who had truly moved on. There was always a pause. Always something unsaid. Always that tiny moment when their eyes revealed more than their words. Last night, someone finally decided to question that silence. And your soulmate was completely unprepared for where the conversation was about to go. What makes this even more surprising is who this dinner companion actually was. Don't skip here, because the obvious answer is probably not the correct one. Your soulmate had not secretly chosen someone else. The person across that table was someone they trusted enough to hear a truth they had been avoiding, a longtime friend who had watched their emotional journey from much closer than you ever realized. And this friend had not invited them to dinner to begin a romance. They wanted an answer. For weeks, perhaps longer, they had been watching your soulmate act as though everything was settled while repeatedly circling back to one unfinished connection. Yours. Every time your soulmate talked about the future, something felt incomplete. Every time they claimed they were ready for a completely different chapter, they somehow returned to an old memory involving you. Their friend finally became curious enough to ask the question nobody else had asked directly: if you are really finished with this person, why does everything still lead back to them? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. That silence became the loudest moment of the entire dinner. Their friend waited. No pressure. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence. Then your soulmate finally admitted something unexpected. They said that moving forward had been much harder than they allowed anyone to see. They admitted that there were moments when they almost reached out to you but stopped because they did not know how they would be received. They admitted that they had replayed old conversations and wondered whether something important had been misunderstood. But then came the sentence that made their friend lean forward. Your soulmate quietly said, "I don't think the story ended where I thought it ended." Think about that. They were not declaring some fantasy. They were recognizing an unresolved truth inside themselves. Something about you still felt unfinished. Something about the connection still raised questions. And their friend immediately realized this dinner had become much more important than expected. Because now the real question was no longer whether your soulmate remembered you. The question was what they were planning to do about it. Then the conversation took a turn your soulmate never expected. Their friend did not tell them to forget you. They did not encourage them to replace you. Instead, they challenged them. What exactly are you afraid of finding out? That question landed differently. Your soulmate had prepared explanations for why they had remained distant. Timing. Confusion. Pride. Uncertainty. Circumstances. But fear of discovering the truth? They had never described it that way before. Suddenly, everything looked different. Perhaps the distance was not proof that they felt nothing. Perhaps part of that distance existed because discovering that you still mattered would force them to make a decision. Their friend began reminding them of things they had said about you months earlier, little comments your soulmate probably assumed everyone had forgotten. The way they described your personality. The way they remembered tiny details. The strange softness that appeared whenever they spoke about a particular memory involving you. Your soulmate became quieter with each reminder. Then their friend revealed something your soulmate had not expected at all. Every time you talk about what you truly want in someone, you describe qualities you already associated with them. Again, your soulmate knew exactly who "them" meant. You. This was the moment the dinner stopped feeling ordinary. Your soulmate had entered that restaurant believing they were simply meeting a trusted friend. Now they were sitting across from someone holding up a mirror to feelings they had spent a long time organizing, hiding, questioning, and occasionally denying. Stay till the end, because this friend had one more observation, and it was the one your soulmate could not dismiss. They said, "You keep waiting for certainty before doing anything, but maybe certainty only comes after an honest conversation." Your soulmate stared at them. Something shifted. Not dramatically. Not magically. But noticeably. Because for the first time, someone had turned the entire situation around. Instead of asking whether you would return, whether circumstances would change, or whether some perfect moment would arrive, your soulmate was being asked whether they were willing to become honest about what they actually wanted. And then something happened that even their friend did not expect. Your soulmate reached for their phone. For a few seconds, their friend assumed they were checking a notification. They weren't. Your soulmate opened something connected to you. Maybe an old conversation. Maybe a photograph. Maybe something small that had remained buried among countless other things. Whatever it was, their expression immediately changed. Their friend noticed and said nothing. Your soulmate simply stared at the screen as though a memory had suddenly become present again. Then they whispered something revealing, "I almost sent a message recently." Their friend asked, "Why didn't you?" Another pause. Your soulmate gave the answer that had apparently been controlling far more of this story than anyone realized. I didn't know if I still had the right to. That sentence explains so much. Your soulmate may have looked distant while privately wondering whether crossing that distance would be welcomed. They may have appeared calm while questioning whether too much time had passed. They may even have convinced themselves that silence was respectful when part of that silence was actually uncertainty. But their friend challenged that too. They reminded your soulmate that an honest message does not have to demand anything. A conversation does not have to arrive carrying promises. Sometimes two people simply need clarity. And suddenly your soulmate began considering a possibility they had repeatedly pushed away, speaking honestly without trying to control the outcome. Something huge was waiting inside that realization. Because once a person stops trying to predict every response, they can finally decide whether honesty itself is worthwhile. Your soulmate locked their phone again, but the thought did not disappear with the screen. Their friend could see it. The entire energy of the dinner had changed. The meal was nearly finished, yet the real conversation had only just reached its deepest point. Your soulmate asked one final question: "What would you do?" Their friend smiled, but instead of giving them an easy answer, they said something far more powerful: "I would stop asking everyone except the person whose answer actually matters." Your soulmate immediately understood. And for the first time that evening, they had nothing to say. By the time they left the restaurant, your soulmate was carrying a completely different thought than the one they had arrived with. Last night's dinner had not introduced someone new into their heart. It had forced them to confront someone who was already there. You. Their mysterious date was a trusted friend, but the real subject sitting invisibly between them throughout the evening was the connection your soulmate had never fully resolved. And here is the final detail you need to hear. Before they separated, their friend asked them one last question: "If you knew there would be no embarrassment, no misunderstanding, and no pressure, would you want to speak to them again?" Your soulmate answered much faster this time. No long pause. No complicated explanation. Just a quiet, immediate response: "Yes." That answer surprised even them. Sometimes we do not discover what we truly want until someone removes all the imagined consequences from the question. Your soulmate had spent so much time thinking about what might happen that they had almost forgotten to ask what they actually hoped would happen. Last night changed that. It did not guarantee what comes next. It did not magically write the future. But it created something that had been missing: clarity. Your soulmate now understands that silence cannot answer the questions they have been carrying. They understand that wondering about you indefinitely will never reveal what an honest conversation might reveal. And perhaps the most surprising part is that their friend noticed the change before your soulmate did. As they were leaving, the friend looked at them and said, "You already know what you want to do." Your soulmate smiled. Not because everything had suddenly become simple, but because they knew their friend was right. So don't skip what comes next in this story. The dinner date was never the revelation. The revelation was what your soulmate admitted during it. Because after they returned home last night, alone with the conversation still repeating in their mind, they opened their phone again. They found your name. They stared at it longer than they expected. And this time, instead of immediately closing the screen, their fingers moved toward the place where a new message begins. But what happened after your soulmate opened that message screen is where last night became even more revealing. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard, yet no words appeared. They typed something, erased it, typed again, and erased that too. It wasn't because they had nothing to say. It was because suddenly they had too much to say, and every possible opening felt either too small or too complicated. How do you begin a conversation with someone who has quietly remained in your thoughts longer than you expected? How do you explain months of silence without turning one message into an entire history? Your soulmate stared at your name while the dinner conversation replayed in their mind. Stop asking everyone except the person whose answer actually matters. That sentence would not leave them alone. And then something even stranger happened. A notification appeared. Not from you. From the same friend who had been sitting across from them at dinner. The message was short: "Don't overthink what you already know." Your soulmate smiled because they had been caught doing exactly that. Their friend knew them too well. But instead of sending you something immediately, your soulmate placed the phone beside them and began walking around the room, thinking. Stay a little longer, because this is where their real internal conversation began. They were no longer asking whether they still cared. Last night had already answered that. Now they were asking why they had allowed so much uncertainty to stand between what they felt and what they were willing to express. They remembered moments involving you that they had tried to categorize as ordinary memories, yet those memories had survived every attempt to make them insignificant. A sentence you once said. A look they remembered unexpectedly. A moment when they felt understood without having to explain everything. These were not dramatic scenes. That was precisely why they mattered. The deepest memories are sometimes the quiet ones. Your soulmate suddenly realized they had been measuring the connection by how much time had passed instead of by how strongly certain moments remained. And that realization led them back to their phone. This time they opened your name without hesitation. But before they typed anything, another memory from dinner returned, something their friend had said that your soulmate had not fully understood until now. Earlier that evening, somewhere between the first conversation and the final question, their friend had looked directly at your soulmate and said, "There is something you do every time this person comes up." Your soulmate had laughed nervously and asked what they meant. Their friend explained that your soulmate always tried to sound logical whenever they spoke about you. They would explain circumstances. They would discuss timing. They would analyze what happened and what might happen. But whenever the conversation became emotional, your soulmate suddenly changed the subject. You can explain everything except how you actually feel, the friend told them. That observation stayed hidden beneath everything else until your soulmate was alone again. Now it made perfect sense. They had turned you into a question they could analyze because admitting the emotional truth felt far more vulnerable. But last night, that strategy stopped working. Something huge was waiting beneath all those explanations, and your soulmate finally allowed themselves to see it. They missed the version of themselves that existed when the connection between you felt open and uncomplicated. That does not mean they believed the past was perfect. They knew it wasn't. They remembered misunderstandings, hesitation, moments when one person probably expected the other to understand something that was never clearly spoken. Yet even those imperfect memories revealed something important. Your soulmate was not longing for some imaginary story. They were wondering whether two people who had learned from distance could someday speak differently than they did before. And suddenly, another detail from the dinner returned. Their friend had asked, "What if you are not supposed to recreate what happened before? What if the only question is whether you can approach this differently now?" Your soulmate had not answered at the restaurant. But sitting alone afterward, they finally whispered, "Maybe." That one word changed the direction of their thoughts. Because now they were no longer considering whether the past could return exactly as it was. They were considering whether something more honest could begin from where both of you are now. Don't skip this moment, because your soulmate then did something they had avoided doing for a very long time. They stopped imagining your response. They stopped creating conversations in their head where you were either completely welcoming or completely distant. They admitted that they simply did not know what you would say. And strangely, accepting that uncertainty made them calmer. Because not knowing was finally beginning to feel better than pretending they did not care. Your soulmate sat down again and started writing. The first message was long. Too long. It contained explanations, memories, apologies for things that may never even have required apologies, and questions that would have overwhelmed anyone receiving them unexpectedly. They read it once and deleted the entire thing. Then they tried something different. A simple greeting. They stared at it. Deleted that too. Then they laughed quietly at themselves, because someone who had spent an entire dinner discussing courage could not even decide how to say hello. But this time the laughter softened something inside them. The situation stopped feeling like a giant emotional test and started feeling human. Maybe they did not need the perfect sentence. Maybe they only needed a genuine one. Their friend's words returned again, "An honest conversation doesn't have to carry promises." Your soulmate understood what that meant now. Reaching out did not require knowing exactly where the story would go. It only required enough honesty to open a door and enough maturity to respect whatever happened afterward. So they began typing again, slowly. This time they did not explain everything. They did not try to impress you. They did not create some dramatic declaration. They wrote something simple enough to feel real, but meaningful enough that you would understand it was not accidental. Then they stopped before sending it. Why? Because one last question entered their mind: am I doing this because my friend told me to, or because I genuinely want to? That distinction mattered. Your soulmate put the phone down again. They closed their eyes and thought about the dinner. They imagined their friend had never said anything. Would they still want to speak with you? The answer came immediately. Yes. That was the moment everything became clearer. Their friend had not created these feelings. The dinner had simply uncovered them. Your soulmate picked up the phone once more. Their message was still there, waiting. Their thumb moved closer to send. But right before they touched it, something stopped them, not fear this time, but a sudden thought about you. What if you had also spent this time believing their silence meant something it never meant? What if both of you had been interpreting absence instead of asking questions? And what if one simple conversation could correct assumptions neither of you even realized you were carrying?